The HOA letter arrived on a quiet morning, bright red ink screaming authority before it was even opened. It demanded repainting his home in an approved neutral tone within 30 days, or fines would follow. He stood on the porch, staring at the paper while the sun reflected off the walls he had painted himself years ago. That color wasn't random. It marked survival after loss, a fresh start after everything collapsed. The HOA never asked why. They never cared. The letter promised consequences, but it also hinted at something else. If he complied now, they would keep pushing later. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as another notice was taped to his door that same week. Meetings were held without him. Decisions were made about his house, his land, his story. He began reading the bylaws late into the night, highlighting lines most people ignored. Somewhere inside those pages was a loophole, and he felt it calling. He didn't want revenge. He wanted peace. But the pressure kept building, and the HOA's tone grew sharper with every message. What they didn't realize was that their demand had awakened something patient and precise. He wasn't planning to argue. He was planning to comply in a way they would never forget, and the first brushstroke was already forming in his mind as the deadline crept closer. At the next HOA meeting, the board smiled politely while reminding him the color guidelines existed for harmony. He nodded calmly, already knowing harmony meant obedience, not fairness. Back home, he spread the rulebook across his kitchen table. Line by line, he studied it like a map. The rules listed forbidden colors, but the language was vague, outdated, and full of assumptions. No one had updated it in decades. What mattered most was what the rules didn't say. He called the county office, then a paint supplier, then a zoning consultant. Every answer confirmed the same thing. He was allowed far more freedom than the HOA believed. When the approval form arrived, he filled it out neatly, attaching the required samples. The board glanced at it and stamped approval without reading closely. That small moment changed everything. Neighbors began whispering when trucks arrived a week later, unloading supplies far brighter than expected. The HOA president drove by twice, slowing down, squinting at the labels. Still, no one stopped the work. They thought he would choose something muted at the last second. He didn't. With every layer applied, the house transformed, not into rebellion, but into a statement. It wasn't ugly. It was bold, confident, and entirely legal. As the final coat dried under the afternoon sun, he stood back and smiled. The house didn't just stand out. It spoke. And soon, the entire neighborhood would be forced to listen. By morning, phones were buzzing across the neighborhood as people stepped outside and froze. The house gleamed in a color no one had ever seen approved before. It wasn't neon or chaotic. It was rich, striking, and intentional, chosen from a premium historic palette the rules never prohibited. Some neighbors secretly loved it. Others panicked. The HOA president arrived with 2 board members, clipboards in hand, confidence already cracking. They cited violations that didn't exist, flipping pages faster as they searched for something solid. He listened patiently, then handed them copies of their own signed approval. Silence followed. The color was compliant. The finish was compliant. The placement was compliant. Every threat unraveled on the spot. Within hours, the HOA emergency meeting was scheduled. Emails flew. Legal terms appeared suddenly in subject lines. But the damage was already done. Photos spread online. Visitors slowed their cars to admire the house. A local blog even featured it as an example of homeowner rights done right. The HOA tried backtracking, claiming misunderstanding, but there was no undoing approval. The color became a symbol, not of defiance, but of boundaries. Neighbors who had felt powerless started asking questions. Quiet thank you notes appeared in his mailbox. The HOA realized too late that enforcing control without understanding the rules had cost them authority. As the sun set, the house glowed warmly, unapologetic and calm, while the board faced something new. They weren't dealing with rebellion anymore. They were facing exposure, and it was only just beginning. The HOA shifted tactics quickly, sending warnings disguised as friendly reminders. They hoped pressure would succeed where rules had failed. Instead of responding emotionally, he documented everything. Every letter, every visit, every sudden rule interpretation was logged with dates and timestamps. When fines appeared on his account, he requested formal justification. None arrived. Neighbors started noticing the pattern, realizing similar tactics had been used against them for years. The house became a gathering point, not for protest, but for conversation. People shared stories they had buried out of fear. The HOA's authority relied on silence, and silence was breaking. A lawyer reviewed his records and smiled. The board had crossed multiple lines. The paint was no longer the issue. Governance was. When the HOA announced another hearing, attendance tripled. Calm voices filled the room, asking simple questions the board couldn't answer clearly. Why selective enforcement? Why approvals without review? Why intimidation? The confidence drained from the table as accountability entered the room. That night, he returned home and looked at the walls again. The color still held meaning, but now it carried something more. It reflected courage, not just survival. He hadn't planned to lead anything, yet here he was, standing at the edge of real change. And the HOA, for the first time, looked unsure of itself. The official notice arrived a week later, this time with legal language and urgency. The HOA wanted mediation, hoping to contain what they had unleashed. During mediation, facts mattered more than feelings. Documents spoke louder than threats. The mediator reviewed approvals, inconsistencies, and the sudden fines. Each point leaned in his favor. The board members shifted uncomfortably as their own signatures resurfaced repeatedly. By the end, the outcome was unavoidable. All fines were dismissed. Enforcement policies were ordered to be revised. The HOA was warned formally against retaliation. Word spread fast. The house, once targeted, became untouchable. The board issued a carefully worded apology. Vague but public. It didn't mention the color, but everyone understood. Neighbors waved more often now. Some even asked for paint recommendations. The HOA president resigned quietly a month later. The color never changed, and neither did its meaning. It reminded everyone that rules without respect become weapons, and knowledge disarms them completely. Standing on the porch one evening, he felt something rare. Peace, earned not by submission, but by standing firm without cruelty. The house no longer felt like a target. It felt like a landmark, and its story wasn't over yet. Months passed, and the neighborhood settled into something softer and fairer. New HOA elections brought transparency, and meetings became conversations again. The revised rules were clearer, stricter on abuse, and protective of homeowners. His house remained exactly as it was, still turning heads, still sparking quiet smiles. Visitors often asked about the color, and he told them the truth. It wasn't chosen to provoke. It was chosen to remind. The reminder worked. Complaints dropped. Creativity returned. People stopped asking permission for joy and started checking the rules for freedom instead. The house appeared in a local magazine as an example of personal expression done legally and tastefully. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. What began as a threat had become a lesson. He never sought attention, yet his choice changed the tone of an entire community. Sometimes power doesn't come from fighting louder. Sometimes it comes from reading carefully and acting boldly. As the sun set again, the walls reflected warmth across the street, a quiet signal that dignity, once defended, tends to spread. The HOA never mentioned the color again, and neither did he. They didn't need to. Everyone already understood the message it carried. What started as a demand ended as a reminder that control only works when people don't know their rights. His house stood unchanged, a calm presence with a loud history. Visitors admired it. Neighbors respected it. The HOA learned from it. The color became unforgettable, not because it was loud, but because it represented choice, clarity, and courage. When people asked how he won, he answered simply. He read the rules and believed in himself. That was the real twist. Not the paint, not the meetings, not the apologies. It was the moment he realized compliance didn't mean surrender. As the story spread, it inspired others far beyond the neighborhood. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.